Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going global with elections.
Elections around the world?
Yeah. You sent over some really cool stuff about how different countries, choose their leaders, and I'm excited to dig in. We've got excerpts from this podcast, Easy English with Us, and, well, it seems like you want to get beyond just like how to vote and more into how different countries approach this whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, the global tapestry of elections, there's the mechanics, the culture, the surprising ways democracy can play out. I think it's fascinating.
Absolutely. I'm always so curious, how other cultures tackle these big questions and if those approaches are kind of similar or totally different from what we're used to.
It's a great way to sort of like broaden our own perspectives, right? And maybe even learn something we can bring back home.
Totally. So this podcast, it highlighted some key election terms: candidate, vote, campaign, democracy. We should probably start there, right? Get on the same page.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, understanding those core concepts, it's like the key to unlocking how elections work here and everywhere else.
Okay, let's unlock it then. When we say candidate, what exactly are we talking about?
Well, picture this. Someone steps up and says, hey, I think I can make a difference here. Elect me. I'll represent you. That person, the one putting their name forward, that's our candidate.
I like that. I want to represent you.
Yeah.
It's like they're applying for a job, but the job is like serving the people.
Exactly. And once you've got candidates, well, you need a way for folks to choose. That's where the vote comes in, the formal act of picking a candidate or, making a decision in the election. It's the cornerstone of any democracy.
Okay. So we've got candidates who want to represent us, and we have the power to vote for the one we think will do the best job. But how do those candidates actually convince us? That's the campaign, right?
Bingo. Think of it like a big performance, a show, where candidates try to win over the audience, the voters. They're sharing their vision, their plans, their promises, all to persuade people to choose them on Election Day. Speeches, debates, rallies, the whole 9 yards.
Woof. Sounds exhausting.
No.
All those speeches, handshakes. I can see why people might shy away from running for office.
It definitely takes a certain personality type to, thrive in that kind of environment, but it's all part of the process, right? It's that chance for candidates to connect with the voters.
So we've got our candidates, our votes, and these like often super elaborate campaigns, but it's all happening within a bigger system. And that's where democracy comes in.
Exactly. Democracy is like the stage where this whole electoral drama plays out, a system of government where the people hold the power. And voting, that's the people's voice, their way of shaping their world.
So it's bigger than just like casting a ballot. It's about having a say in how things are run.
Precisely. It's collective decision-making. It's citizens actively participating, shaping their future. And that brings us to the heart of it. How does an election actually work? What are the steps in this big democratic dance?
Yeah, that's what I want to know. We hear about elections all the time, but what's the process? Does everyone do it the same way?
Well, there's a general framework that most elections follow, even if the details are different. It all starts with the announcement. Potential candidates say, hey, I'm running, declaring their intention to run.
I bet that's like a nerve-wracking moment, putting yourself out there.
Takes courage, for sure. But that's, democracy in action. Anyone who meets the requirements can step up and say, I want to serve.
Okay, and once they announce,
Yeah.
is that when the campaign, frenzy begins?
Yep. The announcement kicks off the campaign season. It's all about rallying public support. And this can go on for months, sometimes even years. Depends on the election.
Oh, man. It's
Oh.
got to be intense. I'm picturing, speeches, debates, rallies, maybe some awkward baby-kissing photo ops.
Haha, you got it. It's demanding, but it's the chance for candidates to connect with people.
So after all that campaigning, we get to the main event, Election Day. What happens then?
That's when citizens exercise their right and head to the polls. Decision time.
I can hear the drum roll. Everyone waiting to see who wins.
Exactly. And after the polls close, the nail-biting part, counting those votes. This can be quick in some places, but in others, days, even weeks to get a final count.
Oh, I bet those are some tense days, especially if it's a close race. Everyone glued to the news watching the numbers.
For sure. And once those results are in, the winner is, declared. Then it's time for them to step into the role, start making good on those campaign promises.
So pretty clear process, right, in theory. But I imagine it can get messy, especially when you factor in all the different ways countries handle this whole election thing.
You're right. Every country has its own unique twists and turns, its own set of rules, traditions.
That's what I find so fascinating. It's like we're all asking the same question. How do we choose our leaders? But coming up with such different answers.
And some of those answers are pretty surprising. The podcast mentioned a few. For example, did you know in Australia, voting is, get this, mandatory?
Mandatory. You mean like it's against the law not to vote?
That's right. If you're an eligible citizen in Australia, you are legally obligated to participate in elections. They even have fines if you don't show up.
Wow. That's so different from many democracies where it's, a right, not a requirement. Makes you wonder about the impact, right? Does it lead to higher turnout? Does it, change how people think about their civic duty?
Those are excellent questions, and they highlight how complex these different electoral systems can be.
It's making me, rethink my assumptions about elections. What other surprising examples did they talk about?
Well, Switzerland has this system of frequent referendums.
Referendums. What are those exactly?
Imagine this. You vote not just for your representatives, but on actual policy issues, things that directly affect you. That's a referendum. A vote by the people on a specific question or proposal.
So instead of electing people to make decisions for you, you get to weigh in on those decisions yourself.
Exactly. In Switzerland, citizens regularly vote on a whole range of issues, from environmental stuff to social reforms. It gives them a very direct say in how their country is run.
Sounds like the Swiss really value direct democracy and citizen participation.
Absolutely. It's a model that really emphasizes giving citizens a voice on, things that matter to them, and it's fascinating to see how it works.
It really is. All these examples are making me realize there's no single right way to do democracy.
You're right. Different countries have different histories, values, political priorities, and those are reflected in their systems.
It's like a global buffet of democracy, right? All these different flavors to try.
And each one has its own unique taste, its own set of strengths and weaknesses. There's no perfect system, but it's really interesting to look at how different countries have, tried to balance things out.
This is so much more nuanced than I thought. I'm seeing elections in a whole new light.
That's what we're here for, right? Digging into the complexities.
My assumptions are definitely challenged. So even though all these systems are different, it seems like they share a goal: giving citizens a voice.
Exactly. Whether it's picking representatives, doing referendums, even being required to vote, the idea is the same. Empower people to shape their communities, their countries.
That's what makes elections so powerful, right? They're a tool for change, a way for people to be heard, hold their leaders accountable.
Absolutely. A cornerstone of any functioning democracy.
Yeah.
And understanding how they work, why they matter,
Uh-huh.
It's crucial.
Well said. This has been a fascinating dive already. It's amazing to think about how this one concept, elections, can look so different, so surprising around the world.
It really is. And we've only just scratched the surface. There are so many more fascinating examples, each with their own story.
I'm ready for more. Maybe we should take a quick pause and pick up the conversation after a break.
Sounds good. Back in a flash.
Okay, so we've talked about these different approaches to elections, like, mandatory voting in Australia and Switzerland's frequent referendums. It really highlights how, diverse democratic systems can be.
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? A reminder that democracy isn't like a one-size-fits-all thing. So many forms, each shaped by a country's history, culture, values.
Exactly. And that variety makes me wonder, what are the strengths and weaknesses of those different approaches? For instance, what about this mandatory voting thing? Does it actually lead to, better outcomes, or does it create other problems?
Well, that's a question that sparks a lot of debate. Proponents of compulsory voting, they argue it leads to higher turnout, right? Which means the election results are more representative of the whole population. They also say it encourages citizens to be more informed about the issues and candidates, since they know they have to vote.
So it kind of forces people to engage with the political process, whether they want to or not.
Precisely. But of course, there are critics too. They argue that forcing people to vote can lead to uninformed or even random voting. After all, if you're legally obligated to cast a ballot, you might just tick a box without really thinking about it.
Right. And isn't there also an argument about individual freedom? Some people might feel like it's their right to choose not to vote.
Absolutely. That's a key point of contention. Critics argue that mandatory voting, it infringes on individual liberty. Citizens should have the right to abstain if they want to.
It's a tough one, for sure. Seems like valid points on both sides.
There are, and that's what makes these discussions so interesting, right? There's no easy answers, just different perspectives.
It's a reminder that no system is perfect, really. Every approach has its pros and cons.
Exactly. And it's up to each society to decide what values and principles they want to prioritize when they design their systems.
Okay, so we've talked about mandatory voting, the good and the bad. What about Switzerland's referendums? How do those frequent votes on policy issues, how do they impact their society?
Well, one of the most notable effects is that it gives Swiss citizens like a much more direct role in shaping policy. They're not just electing representatives to make decisions for them, they're directly weighing in on those decisions themselves.
It sounds like it could create a really engaged and informed citizenry, right?
Yeah.
If you know you're going to be voting on stuff.
It certainly can. When your vote could directly impact a policy, you're more likely to, pay attention. Educate yourself about the arguments.
But could there be downsides to that too? I imagine it could also lead to, like, political fatigue, constantly having to vote on so many things.
That's a valid concern. Some critics argue that, too many referendums can be overwhelming and maybe lead to decision-making based on, emotion or incomplete information.
It makes you wonder, like, what happens when a really complex issue is put to a public vote? Can everyone really grasp all the nuances,
That's a great point. And it highlights one of the challenges of direct democracy, right? Ensuring voters have access to accurate information, especially when you're dealing with complex policy questions.
I could see how things could get tricky. It's a lot of responsibility to put on the average citizen.
It is, but supporters of referendums argue that it's that responsibility that, fosters a sense of civic duty, ownership over the process.
So it's a trade-off, right? Potentially more direct democracy, but also potentially more complexity, more challenges in, like, ensuring informed decision-making.
Exactly. It's a balancing act. No one right answer.
Okay, so we've seen how these different approaches, the mandatory voting, the referendums, can have both positive and negative effects. It's making me realize, wow, these systems are really complicated.
They are, but that complexity is what makes them so fascinating, don't you think?
I do, but it also makes me curious, what about systems that aren't really democratic? Like, how do those work?
That's an important question. And it brings us to the reality that, not all elections are created equal. Some systems, while they may have elections in name, don't really reflect the principles of, free and fair democratic representation.
You mean like in countries with authoritarian regimes?
Exactly. In those cases, elections might be held, but they often lack genuine competition or independent oversight. The outcomes might be, predetermined, or there might be restrictions on who can run or how campaigns are conducted.
So it's more about creating an illusion of democracy than actually, empowering the people.
That's often the case, unfortunately. And it highlights how important it is to look beyond the surface. Critically evaluate the fairness and transparency of any system.
It's a reminder that democracy is more than just, like, holding elections, right? It's about upholding certain principles, like freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, the right to free and fair elections.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Those principles, they're the foundation. And they're essential for ensuring that elections actually reflect the will of the people.
Wow, these examples are really opening my eyes to, like, the whole spectrum of electoral systems out there. It's fascinating, but also a little overwhelming. Where do we even begin to make sense of it all?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to, approach these topics with curiosity and open mind. Be willing to learn about different systems, consider different perspectives, and, challenge your own assumptions.
That's great advice. It's all about being an informed and engaged citizen. Right.
Exactly. And it's a journey, not a destination. There's always more to learn, more to explore when it comes to, elections and democracy.
Well, I'm definitely feeling more informed and engaged already. This deep dive has been so insightful.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you, and I hope our listeners are feeling inspired to, keep learning, keep questioning, keep engaging with this vital process of, choosing our leaders.
Absolutely. To all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those votes coming. Because ultimately, the future of democracy depends on, an informed and engaged citizenry. Right. So we've seen how countries approach elections, from Australia's mandatory voting to Switzerland's frequent referendums, and like how those different systems can impact citizen participation, engagement, even the outcomes.
It's been a journey for sure. We've seen how democracy can look so different around the world, and we've wrestled with some tough questions, right, about what makes a system fair, effective, truly representative.
It's really made me think differently about elections. And it's got me wondering, if we could design the ideal system, what would it look like? What would we want to prioritize? to like make sure it's truly democratic and actually
Right.
works?
That's a great question. And it's one that, well, it's been debated for ages. There's no simple answer, of course. Every system involves trade-offs, and you got to think about each society's context, their values.
Right. But it's an interesting thought experiment to picture a system that's like super fair, transparent, and encourages everyone to participate.
Hmm.
What would be on your list for that ideal system?
For me, accessibility would be huge, making voting as easy and convenient as possible for everyone. No barriers, whether it's, logistical stuff, financial, or even just how you register.
So no more long lines, no confusing registration forms, no feeling like your vote doesn't even matter.
Exactly. You want a system that encourages everyone to participate, make sure everyone's voice is heard, no matter your background, your income, where you live.
Makes sense. A truly representative democracy needs, well, a representative group of voters. What else would be crucial?
Transparency. Every step of the process, from campaign finance to vote counting, should be open for everyone to see. It builds trust, makes people accountable, and, reduces the chances of things getting manipulated.
It's like that saying sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? For elections, transparency is key to making sure people believe in the process.
Exactly. Okay, so we've got accessibility, transparency, what else? Well, we can't ignore, how much information is out there these days. So informed decision-making is key. Our ideal system would really prioritize voter education, media literacy, making sure people have the skills to think critically.
Yeah.
To spot biases, make choices based on facts.
That's so important now more than ever. It's hard to know what to believe sometimes. We need to give people the tools to be smart about the information they're getting.
I agree. And that means not just giving them information, but teaching them how to think for themselves, how to have those respectful debates and base their decisions on evidence and reason.
Creating a space for real discussion, not just like shouting matches.
Right. Which brings me to what I think is the most important thing: active, informed citizen participation.
So it goes beyond just the mechanics of voting. It's about creating a culture where people feel like they can participate,
Yeah.
that they can hold their leaders accountable and, really shape their communities.
Yes. The ideal system makes people believe their voices matter, that their votes make a difference, that they have a real stake in the outcome.
That's a powerful idea, a system that empowers, informs, and inspires, something to strive for, even if, perfection is probably impossible.
I think so too. It's a journey, right? The pursuit of a more perfect democracy. We have to keep reflecting, adapting, learning from what works and what doesn't.
Well, this has been such a thought-provoking deep dive. I'm definitely walking away with a much deeper understanding of elections and feeling inspired to, think more about how we can create a more just, more representative democracy.
It's been fantastic exploring these ideas with you. And I hope our listeners are feeling that same inspiration to keep learning, keep questioning, keep engaging with this whole process of choosing our leaders.
Absolutely. To all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those votes coming. Because at the end of the day, democracy depends on us, on all of us being informed and engaged, on